Morning, everyone. Today is the Town Council regular meeting, Wednesday, September 2nd, 2020. At this time, we will say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
to the flag
of the United
of the
States
United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Oh, I guess I missed the red shirt day.
Yes, you did. You didn't get the memo, Carol?
No.
My goodness, you missed that.
Chris didn't get it either.
No, I didn't. And Carl. Nobody wanted Carl either. All right, we will move on to number 2, which is visitors. Are there any visitors on the call that would like to be recognized at this time? Any visitors that would like to be recognized? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to number 3, which is the approval of the minutes for the August 19th, 2020 meeting. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. Next will be number 3. I know that this is for the appointments, reappointments, Ethelene DeBona for the Senior Resources Advisory Committee. I know that we had sent out an email to all the council members for their opinion on this earlier. Wanted to do that so that she could attend the first meeting that they had, but wanted to put it onto the agenda item so we can all obviously have it out there so everybody knows. So at this time, we'll look for a motion to approve Ethelene DeBona to the Senior Resources Advisory Committee.
So moved. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Second? We good with a second?
Okay.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
I'll abstain.
Thank you. Oh, come on, Eric.
Oh,
All right. One abstention. Thank you all. So move on to number 5, which is the Clinton Human Services Advisory Board updated bylaws. This was on our agenda a couple weeks ago. We asked for some clarification. They went through the process at their subsequent meeting and made the adjustment, made the change, made the motion to approve the updated bylaws. So it's all set. At this point, we would just look for a motion.
Moved.
Okay, the motion would be for the town council. The town council of the town of Clinton hereby ratifies updated bylaws for the Clinton Human Services Advisory Board as recommended by the Human Service Advisory Board. The motion to approve. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any other further discussion? All in favor?
aye.
Abstain. Thank you all. Moving on now to number 6, which is the appropriation of $35 million to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorization of the issuance of refunding bonds to the finance of such appropriations. We can have Carl speak to it a little bit, but generally speaking, it's pretty standard practice that obviously if we can get a better interest rate on these bonds, we can turn around and refinance them and save the town some money. So Carl, if you want to just maybe speak to a little bit more on that.
Yeah, our financial advisor is always looking for opportunities to reduce debt. So he's been in conversations to identify a certain tranche of bonds that could be refinanced. In this particular case, it's going to be a combination of taxable and tax exempts. But even the tax exempt or the taxable bond rate is less than what we had in prior debt. So there's, I guess, 2 actions in terms of the structure. One is to authorize that we would go out to the marketplace and try and refinance the bonds. That's something the town has done in the past. And then second is how the debt savings is to be structured. So Mary, if you could do the share screen. I gave you the backup for what came out of our financial advisor, but this chart shows it a little bit more in a graphical format. You can see the blue line is the existing debt that has been issued by the town, with a spike coming up in terms of what that debt service is going to look like. So if you look at the chart, or you know this from the past, fiscal year 23-24 is when the town would reach the highest point on already issued debt. So the green bars represent where the savings would be. So in this particular case, we're using the savings from the bonds instead of spreading it out each year, but in an attempt to scrape off the top of that peak so that peak bonding does not reach over $5 million. You can see that we would stay underneath that $5 million threshold for the current fiscal year, next three fiscal years, and then we start to slide down. The slide down starts to parallel the prior amortization schedule. So it's really just scraping off the top of that wave in the first few years. So this is an opportunity for overall reduction, providing some flexibility in the budget instead of those fixed payments in excess of $5 million for bonds, debt service, and providing new opportunities for us going forward, getting some much needed cushion in the reval budget year and then the next two.
Thank you, Carl. So at this point, then we're looking for then, I guess, Carl, the first motion would be to authorize for bond restructuring.
The singular motion is approval of the resolution that's in front of you, authorizing the appropriation of $35 million to refund certain of the town's outstanding bonds and authorization of the issuance of refunding bonds to finance such appropriation.
Okay. Do we have a motion for that?
So moved.
And then a second?
Second.
Any other further discussion at this time? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you very much. Thank you, Carl. Now we will move on to line item 7, Board of Education Administrators Contract. We do have a suggested motion here. Just so a little background on this, the administrator's contract is in its final year for the 2021 school year. Statute and law requires that they negotiate this new contract the summer prior to. So they've been dealing, Board of Education obviously would be dealing with this. This is something that in the past, not necessarily coming before the Board of Selectmen, but conversations subsequent to this was a suggestion that they do come forth. 30-day waiting period that exists on this contract. And it was suggested that the town take action before the 30 days, otherwise it goes into effect. So essentially a vote to not reject the agreement establishes the practice of having the council, quote unquote, approve it as opposed to being silent and having it go into it in effect without action or acknowledgement. So essentially what we are making a motion to do is not to reject the union agreement reached between the Clinton Board of Ed, the Clinton Administrators Association is voted by the Board of Education on August 27th, 2020. Mary Ann, I believe, is on the call, and Erica is on the call as well. If anybody has any questions for either of them, before we go forth, we can bring them onto the call and see if anybody has any questions for them. Okay, hearing none, then want to move with the motion to approve.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any other further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
I'll abstain.
Thank you, Eric. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Number 8, which is the approval of the Memorandum of Understanding creating a non-lapsing account. At this point, obviously, we'd be open for discussion. Was on our meeting the last time about establishing an account, and we all have received the Memorandum of Understanding. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this memorandum? Carol.
Okay, I'm looking at item 1, pursuant to Connecticut General Statute, an amount not to exceed 2% of fiscal year 20 estimated at $672,290. So that figure that's in here is 2% of the total budget. Am I correct? That is not an estimate of a surplus in the Board of Ed budget this year.
The only way you put the money in is if there is a surplus of that dollar amount. So the surplus that the Board of Ed would be turning back is greater than that dollar amount. So some of it would be going into, some of what the Board of Ed would be turning back goes into the non-lapsing account, and then some of it would go towards fund balance like a normal.
Back into the general fund. Okay, so this figure that's in this MOU is just 2% of the total budget then. That's where this figure came from?
State statute allows for the size of the funds to be
Right.
2% of the
Right.
budgeted
No,
amount.
I'm just
So it's capital and operating.
asking about the math, not about the,
The math is that the
is that figure.
is 2% of what was appropriated for operating and capital.
I got that. Okay. All right. So this is, we would be saying a number, I mean, this figure into a non-lapse, not to exceed number. The 672,000 would be a not to exceed number. Like you just said, anything over and above would go back into the general fund, correct?
For this particular budget year, yes.
Okay, all right. And did I understand during the discussion that this is, there's a time frame on this? Did you say that this would be 1 year because essentially this funding, these funds come from the fact that COVID impacted the budget so heavily? Did you say something about a 1 year time frame for this non-lapsing agreement?
No, that the account would not exist for 1 year. The situation that allowed for the funding is unique to this fiscal year because of the change in how the Board of Ed spent its funds because of COVID from March to the end of the fiscal year. So this year stands out as being unique in that there's this large sum of cash. That's why the auditor brought it forward as an idea, suggesting that the town take a look at it because of this one-time set of circumstances. And a lot of communities find themselves in the same boat. If you put money into it next year or subsequent years, that's up to the town council's decision. And of course, it depends on the financial situation of the Board of Ed at the end of a given fiscal year.
Okay, so this is something we would have to vote on from year to year because the dollar figure would change, correct? I mean, we're voting on this with this specific dollar figure. So I presume that next year we'd have to do this again.
The 2% would change if you were to put more money into it. If you don't put more money into it next year, or there's no surplus next year, there's no action next year. So you've got this pot of cash would exist until it's gone. And then it's a question as to whether or not the Board of Ed would ever have a surplus sufficient to put more cash into it, or if the town's financial policy was to keep something like this going on a longer lived basis.
Okay, so in essence, you are saying that this is a 1 year item. The account will exist, but it's not a given that it will be funded from year to year.
Correct.
Okay,
It's not given because the Board of Ed has to have the surplus and the town council needs to make a decision to put money in. If there's a surplus and the town council decides not to, then the fund only has what is going in at this particular year.
okay,
The town
all right,
council
thank
decides
you.
that there's a surplus and they want to put more money in, you're capped at whatever the 2% math comes out to be.
Okay, thank you.
Carl?
Yep.
Bennett here. So after all that, let me just say this. So is it expected that seeing how we had an overage right now unofficially of approximately $1.9 million from last year, but there was 540,000 for ECS overage and 88,000 for additional special ed. I guess I'm taking it for granted that both of those items then would be earmarked for that fund.
No, so the source of funds that goes into the fund is what's left over in the Board of Ed's operating budget. ECS is a revenue line. So, and that dollar amount, as we discussed during the budget review, ECS was lowballed by the Board of Finance because there was uncertainty at the, in terms of what the state was going to do with its budget. So the only way the Board of Ed has the $672,000 to go into it is because there's at least that much left in their operating budget at the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that clarification.
Anyone else? Okay, so at this point then, we can move forward with an approval for the memorandum of understanding creating a non-lapsing account. We have a motion to approve.
I'll make that motion. Tim?
Second.
I'll second Tim's.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you, everyone. Now we move on to number 9, which is the sidewalk assessment line item transfer. Obviously, we discussed this at our previous meeting about moving forward with this. So we need to approve a line item transfer for the amount needed for this, which is the $6,850. Motion to approve the transfer.
So moved, Mark.
Second?
Second.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I still don't see the point of this. We don't have any money allocated for sidewalk repair. So why are we throwing $7,000 at a project that does not exist? Okay, there.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Abstain? Thank you. Moving on to number 10, Chairman's report, briefly to just 2 items. So I just want to first thank Carl and all the council members for our goal-setting workshop. The presentation that Carl put forth to us was outstanding. Gives us some clear direction as to council members as what we would like to work towards as we move forward, for the next years to come. And I believe it was a great practice for the council to get into, because it does give us some, defining, a clear definition of what we want to do as a council, and hopefully keeps us working together as a council and moving forward in the same direction. So thank you again to Carl for that. And then lastly, just a kind of an update and reminder, when we put forth an advisory committee, that advisory committee is given a charge. Council members, was discussed at the meetings that we've had. Council members not being part of these advisory committees, because these committees come back to the council for discussion. Should these advisory committees want to have a discussion or discuss something that they have on their charge, they would need to come back to the full council and have that discussion with the full council, not individual members on an individual basis. So please, as we go forward with these advisory committees that we set up, that we work towards, we work towards this. That is all I have. We'll move on now to the town manager's report.
You have my written report. So the steep grant application went in on Friday of last week. Also a letter of support from Senator Needleman and Representative McLaughlin went directly to OPM also on Friday, endorsing the town's grant application. Previously in one of my reports, I noted that CRAD is doing some pre-registrations for flu vaccine. The emphasis in public health this year is that flu vaccinations take place earlier to make sure that we can differentiate between flu-like symptoms that are flu and flu-like symptoms that are COVID-19. So some of those pre-registrations have been recorded. We've made it available on social media. We made it available on the town's website. And not that it's a competition, but the majority of the other CRAD towns have been an awful lot of public interest in that pre-registration for vaccine, for flu. The hope is that we can increase the Clinton participation because where there's going to be a satellite vaccination is a function of where some of these pre-registrations have taken place. So not sure whether we'll have a vaccine clinic in Clinton if only 9 people are on record. Or can we get the vaccine? You may have noted in the paper that the governor set forward a process yesterday afternoon in order to extend his executive orders. So he submitted something to a committee of state leadership yesterday afternoon. That committee has 72 hours in which to act, which takes us out to September 4, in order to then confirm that his executive authority is extended out until February 9th. I believe the votes are in place, so it's not likely that we're going to have anybody say no. So it would appear as if all the executive orders allow for continuing authority going out to February 9. I guess for the purposes of this group, that means electronic meetings. The rules that allow for these virtual setups allow for virtual meetings to continue out until February 9. We always have means to meet in person if need be. We just have to be mindful of trying to solve the technology issues to allow the public to participate and stay under that 25 per person participation. In my written report, I noted for you the bid opening on the Pleasant Valley Bridge replacement. The apparent low bidder is in at $1.186 million. So we're going through a process to determine that individual's ability to deliver on the bid, confer with the state, since there's a hefty state contribution to the project, in order to have that project move forward ultimately. The Stanton House lease that you approved as a 6-month extension at the last meeting, I did give you some of the concerns in regard to the Stanton House's request that we remove the playground, grade the property, remove the fencing. The grading and removal of fencing is sort of the easiest stuff. It's the playground. Playground does have value to the town. So to remove it and properly install it back so that it still has the safety requirements associated with it was estimated at about $50,000. It's real early in the fiscal year to be saying we've got $50,000 of excess to move a playground. So that's something we're going to have to be mindful of as to whether that's something that's done this fiscal year or has to be baked into the budget going forward into next year. And then also town engineer RFP that's been written and is prepared, and they'll be going out in terms of a public notice this week and looking for proposals to be back by the end of September for selection of a new contract town engineer. And the rest of the report you can read as submitted.
Thank you, Carl. Anything for Carl? Thank you very much. Moving on to number 12, which is the Town Council Committee Liaison Reports. Does anybody have anything to report at this time?
I've got something very briefly. The Planning and Zoning Regulations Committee met on the 27th and discussed at length contractor businesses and storage yards. Knowing not exactly what to do with this, they're going to move it to the full commission on the 14th. Planning and Zoning public hearing on the 31st discussed AR 20-015 proposed amendments to the zoning regulations, and they did approve a 90-day demolition waiver request for 3236 Carter Hill Road. And then last night, the Inland Wetlands Commission met and discussed possible changes to the regulations and under whose purview the Beaver Dam regulations would fall. So that was interesting to listen to say the least. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Anybody else? You really can't top the Beaver Dam talks.
Thank you very much. A lot of hard work there.
Anybody else? All right, thank you. At this time, we'll move on to number 13, which is a motion to go into executive session and invite Carl and Mary.
So moved.
Second. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? All right, thank you. We'll go into executive session.